Yeah, but I can't access my email to see if they confirmed that bomb squads have been involved in it. So I had requested a follow-up if they were there on site, but I can't open my email. Okay. Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, when we're done with TV or videos, I'll send you the signal runway so whenever you're recording the video.
It says track.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds good. Should be right now. Sounds good. Okay, so you have it plugged in? Oh, you do? Huh?
Is everybody ready? Good afternoon. I'm Joe Gonzales, Bexar County District Attorney. This community is aware of an incident that occurred January 23rd of this year, some 6 months ago, where SAPD responded to a mental health / criminal mischief case involving a lady by the name of Melissa Ann Perez. This call resulted in the shooting death of Ms. Perez. That case was investigated by SAPD and murder charges were ultimately filed by that department on all 3 officers. A portion of the video of this incident was released to the public. It is difficult to watch. As a result of a complete case that was filed on all 3 officers by the San Antonio Police Department, my Civil Rights Division, headed by Assistant District or Chief Daryl Harris to my right, assisted by 2 other members of that division, Nicholas Maru, I'm sorry, Nicholas Maru and Lieutenant Mike Castillo. And they, after a full review and preparation of this case, presented it to the grand jury this week. Today, a grand jury returned 2 bill of indictments on all 3 defendants. 2 of these individuals have been charged with first-degree murder. The 3rd is charged with first-degree aggravated assault with a deadly weapon by a public servant. I will go over these indictments now, and after that, we'll take any questions from you. I have, as I say, 3 different indictments. 2 of them charge these individuals with murder. In the interest of expediency, I'm going to read the different counts and paragraphs that apply to both defendants Alfred Flores and Elazar Alejandro. And while I'm reading the indictments, we'll refer to the defendant Flores and defendants Alejandro. Count 1 alleges a first-degree murder against both defendants Alfred Flores and Elazar Alejandro by alleging that on or about the 23rd day of June 2023, Alfred Flores and Elazar Alejandro, hereinafter called defendants, with intent to cause serious bodily injury to an individual, namely Melissa Ann Perez, did commit an act clearly dangerous to human life that caused the death of Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as the complainant, by shooting the complainant with a deadly weapon, namely a firearm. Paragraph B alleges that on or about 23rd day of June 23rd, defendants Flores and Alejandro, hereinafter called defendants, did intentionally or knowingly cause the death of Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as a complainant, by shooting the complainant with a deadly weapon, namely a firearm. As mentioned, these are first-degree murder charges which carry the range of punishment from 5 to 99 years or life. Count 2 alleges aggravated assault with a deadly weapon by a public servant. It alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June of 2023, defendants Flores and Alejandro, hereinafter referred to as defendants, did use and exhibit a deadly weapon, namely a firearm, and the defendants did intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly cause bodily injury to Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as complainant, by shooting the complainant with said deadly weapon. And the defendant was then and there a public servant acting under the color of their employment, namely San Antonio police officers. Paragraph B of count 2 alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June of 2023, defendants Flores and Alejandro did intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly cause bodily injury to another, namely Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as a complainant, by shooting a projectile at and in the direction of the complainant, thereby causing serious bodily injury to the complainant, and the defendants were then and there public servants acting under color of their employments, namely as San Antonio police officers. Again, these are both aggravated assault with deadly weapon charges that are first-degree offenses. Again, they carry a range of punishment of 5 to 99 years or life. In addition to that, the grand jury has charged these individuals with a count alleging aggravated assault by threats. Count 3 alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June, defendants Flores and Alejandro did then and there, referred to as the defendants, did use and exhibit a deadly weapon, namely a firearm, and the defendants did intentionally and knowingly threaten imminent bodily injury to Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as a complainant, by shooting at and in the direction of the complainant with said deadly weapon. And the defendants were then and there public servants acting under color of their employments, namely San Antonio police officers. That again is a first-degree offense. Count 4 alleges a manslaughter charge, and it alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June 2023, defendants Flores and Alejandro did recklessly cause the death of an individual, namely Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as a complainant, by discharging a deadly weapon, namely a firearm, at and in the direction of the complainant, and the defendant was then and there a public servant. And the defendants were then and there public servants acting under the color of their employments, namely as San Antonio police officers. And lastly, there's an allegation of deadly conduct, which is a third-degree offense. The third degree carries a range of punishment from 2 to 10 years, along with a $10,000 fine. The last count of deadly conduct alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June 2023, defendants Flores and Alejandro, hereinafter referred to as defendants, did intentionally discharge a firearm at and in the direction of an individual, namely Melissa Ann Perez, and the defendants were then and there public servants acting under colors of their employment, namely as San Antonio police officers. As mentioned, the third individual, Nathaniel Villalobos, was charged in a multi-count indictment with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, again, first-degree felony, and is also facing a count of deadly conduct. That indictment alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June 2023, Nathaniel Villalobos, hereinafter referred to as a defendant, did then and there use a deadly weapon, namely a firearm, and the defendant did intentionally and knowingly threaten imminent bodily injury to Melissa Ann Perez, hereinafter referred to as a complainant, by shooting at and in the direction of the complainant with said weapon. And the defendant was then and there acting as a public servant under a color of his employment, namely as a San Antonio police officer. And the last count alleges that on or about the 23rd day of June 2023, Nathaniel Villalobos, hereinafter referred to as a defendant, did knowingly discharge a firearm at and in the direction of an individual, namely Melissa Ann Perez, and the defendant was then and there a public servant acting under the color of his employment, namely San Antonio police officer, signed against the peace and dignity of the state of Texas, foreman of the grand jury. Now, I want to underscore how difficult it is to make the decision to prosecute a member of law enforcement for murder. They are, after all, the protectors of our community. Certainly, it was difficult for SAPD to make the decision to file these cases with our office, but that was the right thing to do. I commend Chief McManus and the rest of the command staff for making this very difficult decision and standing up for Melissa Ann Perez and doing the right thing. I also want to underscore that 99% of the San Antonio Police Department community do an outstanding job. They do their job at protecting our community, never knowing if they're going to go home to their families at the end of their shift. They have a huge responsibility to do their job effectively, honestly, and within the confines of the law. So, when that 1% fails to do that, when they fail to work within the law, they must be held accountable, and that's what is happening here. Thank you very much. We'll take your questions in a minute. Chief Harris, is there anything you want to add to that?
First off, good afternoon. Just in discussing with the elected DA, I'm sure there may be some questions as the initial arrests for all three defendants was for the count of murder. What came out of grand jury, and that is after a careful consideration and deliberation of the evidence of the cases filed, that worked in concert with SAPD and their homicide division, and also an intent to be as comprehensive as we could with the charging instruments. And that would be basically it as to the explanation as to how we wound up here. And that's probably about the limit that we can say with your questions. And we will respond as an office to whatever you have.
Joe,
Yes, ma'am.
for lay people, can you explain exactly what you have to prove as prosecutors when it comes to all of the different counts?
Well, I mean, obviously, well, it may not be obvious, but the law requires that we prove each and every case beyond a reasonable doubt. We have the requirement to prove each and every element of the offense. For example, in every murder case, what we have to do is prove every element that the offense occurred in Bexar County, who the defendant is, the conduct surrounding the charge. But just as important as the conduct is the mental state. For example, with murder, we have to prove that a person committed an act intentionally or knowingly. That is, that he intended to commit the act, or that he did it with the awareness that a certain result was going to occur. That is the obligation that we have every day, and we meet that obligation every day, every week in court. Certainly, that's going to apply in these cases. You heard me talk about different offenses. We're entitled to allege different offenses, different manner and means. So that's what we've done here. Most of what you heard involves first-degree felonies. Most of what you heard involves a range of punishment up to life. But that's for another day. Right? We have to prove this case first, and we'll deal with the punishment at the appropriate time. But typically, what we are concerned about is whether or not we have enough evidence to go forward, whether or not we can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And we made the decision in this case based on what we know, based on what we've reviewed, that this is a compelling case, and that justice demands, and certainly for Melissa and Perez's family, that we hold these individuals accountable.
So just for clarification, there are 2 murder charges, not 3.
There are 2 people that are charged with murder. That's correct, and that's Alfred Flores and Elazar Alejandro. The third individual, Nathaniel Villalobos, was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, which is also first degree, but not a murder charge. ¿Una pregunta?
Sí, ¿podría la posibilidad de hablar en español sobre lo que ha pasado?
Lo que se trata este caso es que hay acusaciones formales que les dicen en inglés indictments, donde nosotros hemos podido presentar evidencia ante un gran jurado para recibir estos acusaciones formales. Se trata de delitos de asesinato y otros delitos como por ejemplo de agresión con agravante. El agravante es de tener una arma, y que esta situación se trató de cometer estos delitos. Estos eran unos oficiales, miembros de la policía, y por lo cual se trata de un delito de primer grado. El castigo es de 5 hasta 90 años, o la pena de vida, o cadena perpetua, como les dicen.
Entonces, a Flores y Alejandro acusados de agresión con agravantes con una arma mortal.
Correcto. Y también de asesinato, que es otro diferente delito.
Totalmente diferente a lo de Villalobos, que solo es acusado de agresión con agravantes.
Correcto.
Y no de asesinato.
Correcto.
Okay.
Okay.
Gracias.
Joe,
De nada.
if someone is being threatened with a hammer, are they not allowed to use deadly force to defend themselves?
Well, that's an issue that is potentially a defense, but we're not there yet. If they raise that a defense, it's up to them to raise that. The issue is one that is handled in trial because these cases are pending. I can't comment on whether or not that's a reasonable defense or not. I mentioned the video. I mentioned that it was difficult to watch. Obviously, there's an allegation of the complainant, in this case, having had a hammer. The question is whether or not that individual was using that hammer in a threatening manner that required the officers to use deadly force. Again, the comment on that is a comment on the weight of the evidence, and is too premature for us to talk about. But I will tell you that we believe that these cases, again, call for us to proceed forward, call for us to be ready to prosecute these individuals for what we believe happened here, which was committing the crime of murder, at least 2 of the 3.
What makes this murder?
Again, the allegation that they knowingly and intentionally caused the death of an individual. In this case, they did that by shooting at the complainant with their deadly weapon, with their firearm.
How long till this goes to trial? How long do you anticipate that trial might last?
Well, that's anybody's guess, but obviously these defendants have their right to their day in court. They've already retained lawyers. I'm sure their lawyers are going to take whatever time is required to adequately prepare for these cases. They're entitled to discovery. They will get whatever discovery they are entitled to. We'll make sure that we're ready to go to trial when the judge calls the case to trial. But to answer your question, it's anybody's guess. I would not expect this case to go to trial until probably mid to late next year. But again, it depends on what court it falls in, depends on the court's docket, because after all, they're the ones that manage the docket. But we'll be ready when the court calls us to trial.
While you handle this case, what is the message to the community, to law enforcement agencies in their county as far as preventing anything like this from happening to anyone else?
Well, the one message I'll tell you, and there's two messages that I can think of. One is what I've said from the very beginning, which is no one is above the law. And if you commit a crime and we have the evidence to prosecute you, we will do what we need to do to hold you accountable. That's including members of law enforcement, including elected officials, anybody that commits a crime. You've seen that we've done that during my administration. So that's message number one. If you break the law, we're going to hold you to account. The other message is that what is kind of an overriding theme in this case, and I think you've heard a little about it, is mental health. Mental health is a serious issue in our community. We ought to all be able to recognize it as quick as possible. We ought to be able to recognize that when someone suffers from mental health, then it requires us to step back, especially those of us in our community that have to make those decisions, those split-second decisions that can end in someone's death. And so, yes, it is my hope that we can focus on better training for our law enforcement community, focus on better training for members of the judicial system to recognize mental health as an issue, to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. Anybody else?
¿Podría dar esos mensajes en español?
Lo que es importante es estar consciente de que estos casos se tratan mucho tiempo de la salud mental de cualquier persona que tenga contacto con los oficiales o la policía. Es importante que nosotros tengamos conocimiento de esos para tratar de evitar este tipo de tragedia, para tratar de trabajar a ayudar a esas personas que sufren con este tipo de condición. All right, well, yes, ma'am.
One last thing,
Sure.
can you talk a little bit about how unprecedented this is? I'm assuming in your experience as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, and now as the elected DA, have you ever seen anything like this?
It is certainly rare. I'm not only a member of a statewide prosecutors association, but I'm a member of several national organizations, and it's certainly a rarity when prosecutors have to make a decision to prosecute someone who's on the same side, right? We try these cases every day. We rely on officers coming to court as our witnesses to provide testimony. So when we have to take a look at people that are part of our prosecution team and decide whether or not they committed crime, that's one of the most difficult decisions to make. That's why I made the decision to create a civil rights division, which is late in coming. When I first came into office, I realized that we were one of the last offices in the country of this size that did not have a civil rights division. So certainly it is a difficult decision to make, but one that is necessary because it is important that we hold members of the law enforcement accountable when they break the law.
I'm not sure if this is more of a question for SAPD or if you're able to answer. Are the officers allowed to continue their duties if they're under indictment, especially for charge of murder? 'Cause I don't know if they're on leave right now or what their status of, are they allowed to continue their duties?
That's probably something you'd have to address with Chief McManus, but my understanding was that these officers had been terminated.
Yes, sir, that is our understanding.
Yeah, so they may not be on the force currently, but again, you know, what happens after these cases are resolved is anybody's guess. But we don't have anything to do with the administrative side of making charging decisions on these officers. All we have to look at, all we need to look at is whether or not these officers' conduct rose to the level of committing a crime. And that's what we did here, and ultimately that's the decision that the grand jury made. And so now it's up to us to get busy and go to work and do the right thing, and again, bring justice to Melissa and Perez and her family. Okay, if there isn't anything else, thank you all very much.